Hey there, I'm Mark from Spectrum Pulse, and today we have from Marina, Princess of Power. So I feel like Marina's gotten kind of a rough deal in her career, but she came back in 2021 with Ancient Dreams in a Modern Land, her best album in years, where yeah, it's hyper-earnest, millennial camp Tumblr core, and not exactly loaded down with nuance, but proof she could indeed still make great pop music, and again, it didn't really move the needle. And yes, that shouldn't matter. By this point, Marina's got a cult following. She's not exactly playing the mainstream game, even in the UK these days. And then Chapel Rome blew up with her brand of queer theatricality, where you can't ignore the artistic parallels in both the sound and some of the target audience. Ergo, with a change in label to go independent with a distribution deal through BMG, and a shift in producers from James Flanagan to CJ Barra, the latter probably best known for a couple album cuts from Carly Rae Jepsen, but likely more for work with Nessa Bartlett and Melanie Martinez in recent years. Yikes. This was marketed more towards the queer dance scene and more for cult following, aka a lot of high camp. But the tricky thing with camp is that purposeful targeting to be camp rarely lands. The artistic visions that get wildly out of control and slide into the good, bad taste of camp requires a certain melodramatic humor and subjective verve in the creation and appreciation, and thus it's kind of a bad sign when listening to Princess of Power. My first two immediate thoughts were, oh, Lady Gaga dropping this year was about the worst thing possible for you, and why is this reminding me of Witness by Katy Perry? Now look, the latter comparison is loaded, I get it, especially as Marina is a far better singer than Katy Perry ever was, but I think there's something to it. The weirdly colorless production that leaves it all feeling more dour, especially on songs that are supposed to have more joyous heart or flair, the breakup subtext that might as well be better off as text, the utter misfire in the primary thematic purpose along with the high concept stretching, in this case trying to tie back to Electra Heart, which feels like forced commentary and a comparison, and it's not a good comparison for this album. The out-of-nowhere clunky rapping coming on I Heart You that doesn't remotely fit in an awkward 70s disco pastiche, and how Marina sounds like she would rather be, well, anywhere else. And let's start with the theme and how it combines with her performance. She was describing this album in interviews as playful, more joyous and freeing, playing for dramatic high camp as the Princess of Power, it's an acronym for pop. Built for the queer club scenes as the prima donna that finally grew up, and man, you know what, I want to buy it, but there's either this odd detachment in the brighter moments or a sour bitterness and confusion leaking through where the vamping's not landing. Less market tested to fit the scene, more tentative and kind of awkward trying to stick the landing. Because camp, high melodrama, they can absolutely embrace some darker emotions, especially in a more theatrical context. Anger, rage, grief, jealousy, the whole villain arc, but compared to the vibrant dramatic swings and the wild firepower that I know Marina can deliver, like on the last goddamn album, that unique flair is just not manifesting. Part of this is her choice to stick so much to her admittedly impressive theatrical range, where she comes across a bit stiffer than she should, outside of the odd, chirpy, girlish vocals which show up right from the title track and is mixed at precisely the range to test my patience, but there's no raw swagger or punch that would go a little bit too far. No Venus Flytrap, no Man's World, not even a better than that. And by the way, it is the worst possible timing to release the 10th anniversary edition of Fruit this year, because even if I think it's a weaker Marina album where I got flamed to hell and back when I said it in my review 10 years ago, I think history ultimately proved me right, and it's certainly better than this. Because another substantial factor here is CJ Barron's production, where even if the grooves are credibly balanced like the wiry piano-driven house bounce of Butterfly or the country-esque gallop of Metallic Stallion, the stink of bad choices that I usually associate with Melanie Martinez, they're here in spades. The strings arrangements that have no body or organic flair, more grainy texture than melody to support Marina and the minor key instrumentals, and the occasional dubious bad compression or auto-tune dropped over the vocal lead, and then some truly egregious creative decisions. What the hell was that synth on the drop of Cupid's Bow, or the dated vocal chop on the drop of Everybody Knows I'm Sad, or the oily really cod reggae rollick of digital fantasy, which could have worked if the synth didn't become a goopy mess. But I also can't solely blame him for this, because it's not like Marina's taking any larger risks in terms of her compositions or arrangement. This is familiar for her. I mentioned Lady Gaga earlier, who also spent Mayhem playing into her comfort zone, but Gaga will overcommit to the intensity and the wild melodrama in her performance to compensate. Where in Marina's first proper independent swerve, that she was hyping up the freedom to get more playful and experimental, and no, it just doesn't happen, which is why I made the Witness comparison, because that album also became colorless and drab and conventional, and was also way too overselling any dramatic change. But what becomes truly dire here? The songwriting and lyrics. And if you thought the last album was short on subtlety or flair, this is the nosedive you might have been dreading. Not just in the broadly sketched breakup meta-narrative, which makes up more of this album than any serving, but also in how starkly amateurish it can feel in the lyrical cadence and word choice and bog-standard metaphors. Cantissimo is probably one of the better songs here as a single, despite the shameless pandering and the weirdly grainy bass line. But the line that struck out to me was, "Do people still say YOLO?" I mean, that paints in stark relief a pop act trying to keep up with the scene rather than living in it, or creating her own. So while the attempts at high Italian romantic melodrama for as an aesthetic to embrace, well, for one, it's been done before and done better, but two, I don't hear a fully conceptualized commitment to the bit in the music outside of some strings. Why follow Cantissimo with Rollercoaster? That sounds so basic and underwritten. Where's the thematic vision beyond half-hearted throwing things at the wall to see if anything can stick? I'll say it, Hello Kitty as a sincere love song is about as embarrassing as when Avril Lavigne used that title in 2013, but I'm almost willing to give that song the benefit of the doubt as pure camp, because at least it was achingly trying to commit with something with complete sincerity. It's one of the better produced songs here. I'm not saying it's good, but it felt like it was trying more than this. But it also becomes very obvious by Digital Fantasy, followed immediately by Everybody Knows I'm Sad. Marina was trying to get more meta about being a pop star, where we just don't see the real her. You can tell how bitter she is getting burned by the industry. The first two songs are soaked in that betrayed angst, and honestly justifiably so in my opinion. The mishandling of so much of her career feels criminal, and the penultimate piano ballad, Adult Girl, kinda makes it blatant. As someone who grew up in the tangled nightmare of the music industry, robbed of true friendships, the flexibility to grow up in a world that prioritizes youth against some of her own vices at the time, there's real trauma there that she's trying to work through. But this album isn't really about unpacking that, or healing, or finding new community, or anything close to the grander pop feminism in the swings of her last album, broadly sketched as they were. So then ending with Final Boss loaded with the most trite video game references in a breakup song, it just feels obvious and on the nose and empty. I think it's a terrible closing track. And thus pulling it all together, honestly, there's a part of me that feels like I'm punching down at a pop star that's off the major label machine with an indie release where the critics aren't exactly enthused, and this doesn't match her best at all. I'm hoping it's transitional frustration and bitterness that she had to get out of her system before the next big swing, and that it does well enough for her to keep on swinging. The margin's narrower when you're on independent. It's not as bad as Love and Fear. Selling out her personality with even blander writing was the worst decision she could have made, but it's limited as camp and painfully compromised in every single area it needed to go broke, which sadly lands a pretty mediocre album, only saved by Marina being a great singer who quite frankly deserves better than Melanie Martinez's leftovers. There are a couple songs I'll stick up for: Butterfly, Cantissimo, Metallic Stallion, probably the best song there, and maybe I had too high expectations, but as someone who loves Marina at her best, I hope she can get back to it, cause this, it ain't it. So yeah, thanks a lot for watching. If you want to see more, please be sure to like, share, drop comments, subscribe. Yes, I know I'm going to get backlash for this. Look, I really wanted to love this one. I really wanted to. That's why I'm reviewing this, and yeah, it's a disappointment. One of the bigger ones I've had this year, and honestly, this one kind of hurts because I loved Ancient Dreams in a Modern Land. I thought it was going places. I thought it was taking some bigger swings. The fact this album just does not follow through, maybe it's a production issue, but it just landed with a real thud. It did not click for me. But hey, leave your comments down there below. I'm sure, well, hey, I've had to deal with Marina the Diamonds fans before, or Marina fans now. I know how this is going to be. Beyond that, though, anything else I might be able to do to improve my presentation, I'm all ears. And if y'all want to get involved in helping support the channel, yelling at me on my Discord, or when the schedule reopens in July, getting albums on said schedule, link to my Patreon is right over here, also YouTube memberships. Don't feel obligated, tough times, I understand, the option's available. Till then, I'm Mark, you're watching Spectrum Pulse, and I'll see you next time.